For some unexpected last-minute selection of this year's winners. So, Mathilde, we're so sorry we won't have you with us for the full 2 days, but we're really grateful that you made that long journey today both ways. Thank you. And finally, John O'Brien, who is the global lead for climate governance and decarbonisation for Deloitte, and also a wonderful partner for our We Empower Women Entrepreneurs United Nations Sustainable Development Goal Challenge, as is Elemental as well. So, Mitch, thank you for joining us online. A quick background for you as Senior Director of Innovation at Elemental, that you are leading the portfolio across carbon removal, industry, and food and agriculture. You have a very interesting background with a variety of startups focused on sustainability and previously working on building climate resilient communities, in charge of innovation at Chobani, and a couple of years in Detroit with a startup as a Venture for America Fellow. Mitch, thank you so much for joining us, and take it away.
Thank you for having me. And yeah, sorry for not being able to be there in person, but big supporter of all the work you all are doing and excited to be joining the conversation from abroad today. You mentioned Hawaii. I'm actually based in San Francisco, as is a large chunk of the team. But happy to share some overview on Elemental and some of the work that we're doing with a variety of carbon removal, carbon capture utilization companies as well. So Elemental, for those who are new to us, we're a nonprofit investor with about 15 years of experience scaling innovative technology projects that have deep climate and local impact. We invest catalytic capital and really focus on providing expert services to a growing portfolio of over 160 companies across all the different climate sectors. And as a nonprofit, we're supported by over 40 philanthropic and government funders. So, key to our work is we've identified this $150 billion scale gap that companies are facing. Projects are often too small for project financiers or institutional investors and lenders, and absent larger venture rounds, which are increasingly hard to come by without the milestones hit. Companies are kind of faced with this chicken egg situation of where the funding is going to come from to do these deployments. And many of these are later stage pilots. You have some that are more first of a kind, early of a kind type of deployments that fit this sub $100 million or so gap of total project capital that's needed. And this includes lots of carbon removal companies. I think it could honestly be said that CDR companies are in the toughest place of all, or one of the toughest places, given the variability of the voluntary market and kind of this chasm before they're able to reach economies of scale and hit the price points that are more attractive to your standard carbon removal buyers out there. And investors have typically shied away from funding development because it is high risk. A lot can change between some of that pre-project planning and design and from there to when a facility or field deployment is up and running. And that can be, as we are all seeing in real time, market fluctuations due to new policies and regulations, as well as maybe offtake agreements that a company thought was going to come through ended up, dropping at the last minute. And so that's really where we come in, and everything we do is designed to address this scale gap in some way. And it comes through in about 4 different pillars where we're really focusing and providing unique value. The first is on that catalytic capital side. So we invest in companies from about pre-seed to Series B plus typically with anywhere from like 300K to $2 million per company, and really focusing on a specific project that that company is doing that our dollars can be used for. And our 105 million in capital deployed has led to over 11 billion in additional funding for portfolio companies. So we really see this catalytic element happening there. We've also started to use more novel equity hybrid like debt instruments. And when you combine that with the technical assistance and coaching we provide, which I'll get to in a second, there's opportunities to really de-risk these projects for other investors to come in. The second is project expertise. So as you all know here, deploying projects is extremely difficult. We provide really hands-on support to make sure the company's deployments are a success. And so just last year, we delivered a combined 2,000 hours of coaching on capital stack formation, project development, and workforce development, as well as local engagement, some policy support, go-to-market strategy, a whole suite of resources there. Third, and very related to that project success, is the working with communities. And not only obviously is that the right thing to do as you're designing and executing a project, but it's very crucial to a project's success. And so we really help companies understand how to effectively and responsibly engage with the communities and the local stakeholders that are crucial throughout both the early design process and site selection and things like that, as well as engagement during the deployment and thereafter. And lastly, I'll just say, given our focus on catalytic capital and this massive gap in funding that really needs to go into these novel solutions, we're keenly focused on mobilizing this additional private and public sector dollars into climate projects. And I'll hit on examples of that in a minute here. So this is our carbon management portfolio. Over the past several years, we've invested in 16 or so different carbon removal and or like capture utilization companies, pretty much across all the major pathways out there. It actually includes several members or associate members of the New Carbon Economy Consortium. So Carbon Cure, we funded them to secure their first policy incentive for the use of low carbon concrete in public infrastructure projects. And that was specifically in Hawaii, but it was later endorsed by the US Conference of Mayors and replicated in numerous states. Mass Reforestation, we helped fund their first carbon credit sales to Shopify and some other funders in 2022. And we also helped them build a tree seed summit, which they hosted with a variety of local forestry community members, tribal communities, really to support workforce development and training in the communities that they're reforesting with. Vesta on here funded their latest pilot in North Carolina to validate a 10x scale up of their coastal carbon capture solution. And we helped them plan and host a ribbon cutting event with a variety of local stakeholders around the port where they did their deployment. And the last member on here is Aspiring Materials. We invested in them last fall, a little earlier on the commercial journey, but we're helping them with their go-to-market strategy, messaging, and fundraising as they're seeking to prioritize, which markets they should go after first for the byproducts that come from their process beyond the sale of carbon credits. I'm going to hit on one more here that I think really brings home some of this like newer catalytic strategy that we're doing, which is with Capture 6. So Capture 6, they have a DAC process. It's powered by renewable energy and placed at desalination plants and other water treatment facilities. And they can capture CO2 using direct air capture, mineralize, and or do different things with that gaseous CO2, And simultaneously, they're recovering over 50% of clean water from the brine that's piped into the process. And so we funded some catalytic funding for their phase one construction of this project in Palmdale, California. And it's a first of its kind water recovery and carbon capture utilization joint project. And what's real exciting about is the local impact that this is having, because helping mitigate rising water prices during times of drought disproportionately burdens BIPOC households. And so Capture Six's process can actually result in 20 to 40% cost savings for the ratepayers by working with this water utility. So we provided what we call a development safe, which is one of these hybrid equity debt instruments that allows the company to actually pay us our capital back rather than it being like a typical equity investment into a company. And that was to go towards working capital and equipment purchases for the deployment. And again, in addition to the investment, we provided hands-on support around ribbon cuttings and bridging other capital sources. And so by moving first on this transaction, we secured the participation of Palmdale Water District, which is the utility, including both upfront capital and a 20-year offtake agreement for their services, as well as an $8 million grant from the California Energy Commission. So that's just like an example of like the wraparound way that we're really working with companies. And just for the sake of time, I might stop there. But really, like, we are actively raising additional capital and to fund more carbon management projects, and really just look forward to seeing where there are ways to support companies together in partnership with all of you that are here and other key stakeholders. So that's it from me. Happy to answer any questions after the presentations are done and follow up from here. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Mitch, and thanks to you and Elemental for being such a wonderful partner to the New Carbon Economy Consortium. Great to have the examples of our members that you have helped to scale and funded. So what we'll do, if you're able to stay online, we'd love you to hear Mathilde and John, and then we'll do a room full of questions for you at the end. So thank you very much. Mathilde Carraro, wonderful to have you, and I'm going to ask you to come and speak here from the podium as the leader for fellowship and acceleration at the Earthshot Prize. We've seen a number of really global environmental breakthroughs, so exciting, and systems level change happening as well. And Mathilde, you've got a wonderful background from advising on energy and climate policy at the United Nations to working as an advisor to FTSE 100 companies and also accelerators at the venture level. And you look way too young for all the amazing things that you've done. So we're so grateful to have you with us. Thank you so much.
Perfect. Hello, welcome. Thank you for having me today. So I'd like to kick off with a little video just to make you understand how the Earthshot Prize operates.
Prince William is embarking on an ambitious project. The Earthshot Prize will aim to find 50 solutions to the world's
revive our oceans and build a waste-free world.
I feel very hopeful when I see many stakeholders coming together for this specific goal.
Ask yourself, what are you doing?
How do you sort of slow it down a bit so that people are mindful about what they're consuming and how?
Very important to use that voice to really bring all of society along with us.
We need to properly price carbon in our economy.
We provide time across lots of different areas to support finalists.
So with Coral Beta, we built the UAE's first on-land nursery, Coral Nursery.
It's the vibe.
The technology is ready. Now we just need to get it in the hands of everybody.
Give you a glimpse into what the Earthshot Prize is all about, which is urgent optimism and bold action. So today, what I want to talk to you about is how the Earthshot Prize helps climate solutions scale. And not just through financing, but what we believe in is that storytelling and convening power are incredibly powerful levers to help move ideas from the lab to the market into system level change. So I'm Mathilde Carraro. I'm the Director of Acceleration at the Earthshot Prize. Just a little bit about myself. I am not a carbon expert. I'm not a founder, but I spent most of my career building the platforms and the tools to enable entrepreneurs and solutions to scale, bridging policy institutions, government, venture investors all together. So it all started there. I grew up in a small but well-known island called Venice, which is really being impacted firsthand by the effects of climate change, and that's when my passion started and my interest in the space started. So then I joined the UN, where I worked on climate change and energy policy research. And for those of you that are familiar with the UN, it's not necessarily the most fast-paced institution always. So then I decided to move into the venture world and tackle the same challenges, but from an entrepreneurial mindset perspective. And so I joined a venture group called the Founders Forum, and the clicker is not working. But it's happening, it's there. So the Founders Forum group, it's a venture capital, and there I was advising investment groups, corporates, and other large institutions into how they can innovate, how to work with entrepreneurs, and how to launch their accelerator and incubator programs. And that led me, to working at the Earthshot Prize, where I lead our accelerator program for the finalists of the prize. So all of the 15 that get chosen every year, they're getting through the fellowship program, which is a program that I lead. So you might recognize this gentleman over here. This is our principal and founder. His Royal Highness, the Prince of Wales. And about 5 years ago, he had the idea for the Earthshot Prize. And it came about via two realizations. The first one is that there's so much doom and gloom and negativity surrounding climate change. And the second one is that there's so many solutions that already exist out there and that just need the platform to enable them to scale as fast as possible. So it was inspired by JFK's Moonshot Challenge in the 1960s with the idea that if we harness the collective power and creativity and human resources, we can tackle seemingly impossible challenges. So with all of this, he launched the Earthshot Prize. And what we do is that every year we scout and we go all over the world looking for the most promising, most breakthrough solutions out there across our 5 Earthshot categories. And then every year we select 15 finalists in 5 categories and then 5 winners who each win £1 million in catalytic grants. And we announce our winners at an award ceremony every year that travels around the world. So we started in London, then we went to Boston, Singapore, Cape Town, and this year we're heading to Rio in November, which is very exciting. So all started 5 years ago we were twinkling in the eye of Prince William, and now we're proud to say that we have 60 finalists in our portfolio, all across the world, all across different sectors. And we also cover a variety of business model types. So it could be a for-profit startup, it could be an NGO, it could be a youth group, an indigenous group, it could be academia. So anyone that is tackling the climate crisis from a different angle could be selected as a finalist. And of course, decarbonization is the core focus of our Fix Our Climate Earthshot. And we have already outstanding breakthrough solutions in this category, from aquatic, that does ocean-based carbon removal, and to companies like Bumitra, who are developed a carbon soil marketplace connecting farmers in the global south with the carbon market, to 4401, who's capturing carbon and then turning into peridotite rock, accelerating natural mineralization process. So really a wide range of solutions, and they were not just selected because of the scientific and technical sophistication of what they do, but for their readiness to scale, for their ability to go to market and really grow as fast as possible. And one of the things that we're seeing is that out of all of our Earthshots, this is the one that needs probably the most capital and that needs the most support to turn ideas into actual implementation on the ground. There's so many challenges that we heard today, from regulation to financing gaps, a lot of risk involved in these solutions, high capex, so investors are really reluctant to come in. So they need a lot of our support. And over the past year, we hosted numerous roundtables bringing together the highest level policymakers, financiers, all of them to really think about, okay, how do we solve and unlock these barriers for growth for these solutions? And these are some of the things that we do at the Earthshot Prize. So we're not just a prize. Of course, the prize gives the credibility, we give the grant money, but really we are a platform to scale. Especially we focus on 2 core things in addition to the catalytic grant. One is the global spotlight. So we're lucky enough that Prince William is our founder. So he really does help in shining a light onto all of the solutions and turning them into household names. But we do a lot of other things with that privilege that we have. We make documentaries, social media content. We work with media across the world. So we're really turning them into rock stars that are known within our climate world, but beyond that as well. And this is helping attracting a lot of interest, both from consumers, but also from industry. Just last week, we went to Norwich to see one of our finalists called Colorifics, and Kate Blanchett came over and Prince William came over, and they were able to really shine a spotlight on what they're doing. And following that visit, already the inbound request from fashion brands and potential customers of Colorifics skyrocketed just from that increased visibility. And then the last thing is that we have a one-of-a-kind network. So we can open doors that these founders would have never have imagined before. We're lucky enough to have Bill Gates and Jacinda Ardern and Mike Bloomberg in our board of trustees and in our donor group. So they work very closely with those founders and help make connections for them and really help them in different ways by direct investment, technical advisory, support. So there really is that whole world of, if we give you a platform and if you give you the visibility, then you can really move things forward and change things exponentially. One example is Bumitra. I showed you earlier, they do a soil carbon capture. They now have a partnership with 3 of our partners, British Airways and DP World and Uber. And the idea is that they buy their carbon offtakes. And this is really skyrocketing their ability to raise funds that enables them to grow even further. So these are some of the examples of the things that we're able to achieve with our platforms. And here are some numbers. And of course, this is just the beginning. We need to do a lot more. We were able to catalyze 90 million in investment. So we gave out ourselves 5 million in grants, but 90 million were just crowded in by our connection and our investor network. And this has led to, of course, we track every year what's the environmental impact of all of our finalists in our portfolio. And we want to do more. So we want to bring on board many more people. We know we cannot do it alone. We were at London Climate Action Week last week. Our founder was on stage and he kept highlighting and reiterating, it takes a community, it takes all of us to enable this. And I know that many of you are already either nominees or nominators or experts helping us. So we're so grateful for your support. And for those of you that aren't, we invite you to join us and come and help us. There are different ways in which you can join the Earthshot Prize platform, either being a nominator, an official nominator. So you probably know many solutions out there, and we heard by some of them today in this room. So nominate them into the prize. They could become the future finalists and winners of the prize. You could become a global expert advisor. So once the nominations come in, we need to select 15 finalists. That takes many, many people, many eyes, many experts. So we have about 150 experts right now. In our group, we want more. If you have an area of expertise, reach out and you can help us get there. Or otherwise, you can support us by working directly with our solutions. Whether you're an investors, you want to advise them, you know people, you have a great network, just come in and help us understand how we take these solutions from their local world into the global stage as fast as possible.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Mathilde. And just to let everybody know, the Global Futures Lab at Arizona State is a nominator. As you see, a number of our members have been successful. Please let us know if you'd like to be nominated. And I think that offer, we've got many, many brilliant experts in the room too. So some other opportunities for further engagement. Now my pleasure to introduce John O'Brien and to ask him to come to the podium. John's fame preceded him because he had done a lot of work in Australia helping set up the Climate Council, which is a group of Australian companies, and was selected, plucked out of Australia to go to the head office of Deloitte in New York to lead their work on climate governance and decarbonisation. He's also the global lead for the World Economic Forum's board climate governance program, which I think is a really interesting, really interesting thing for this group, John. And we'll be talking to you later about how some of the policy hurdles that we've been hearing might be advanced through that important work that you do at the World Economic Forum. I know you're also the global lead for climate work in the mining and metals area, so hopefully there's some synergies there Well, and I have to say, John's book is also by my bedside. He has written a book called Stories from 2030, setting out practical steps with a number of contributors. And it's one of those things that I like to dip into. So thank you, John, for your myriad contributions to the planet.
Thank you. And I do note you didn't say, and it's amazing that you've done so. I look so young, and I've done so much, but it's okay. I'm not upset. So thank you, Amanda. Very generous welcome. And having not met, I come from a well-known small island, called the Isle of Wight, which is kind of like Venice, except it's not sinking. I also spent 10 years running a clean tech accelerator in Australia and working with lots and lots of companies at different stages of development and helping them commercialize. My colleague, Kat Lampen, bizarrely was in that video you showed. So Deloitte is, I didn't realize. I do know that Deloitte is one of the major partners of Earthshot. As part of I'm going to talk about climate finance sometime soon. But one of the things with the Clean Tech Accelerator we did, and maybe we can talk about it on the panel as well. So we'd have a 3-day boot camp at the beginning of a sort of a 6-month program for all these really cool companies, 300 applications, get it down to 30 in Australia. And we'd have 30 companies in the room. And my opening for each year was fantastic. To get here, you've all got great technologies. Well done. Really amazing stuff. And having a good technology is about 20% of having a good business. So we're now not going to mention any of that anymore, and we're going to actually just work on the business side. And it's how to deflate a room of 30 companies who've just spent 10 years of their life making the technology work. And it's all about the business side. So what I work on is the business side. And how do we think about finance differently? So you can go and get sort of venture capital from Elemental or others, and there's various other ways. But how do we start thinking about the financing challenge slightly differently? And changing systems is very hard. Arguably, I live in New York. Arguably, there's a president who is changing systems, maybe not for the better, but he is changing things, and it's messy. Changing is messy. One of the challenges of financing new technologies is there's a risk premium on newness, because the markets, the financial markets, get very comfortable. We've done 500 of these. We know what the risk is. We know how many fail. So what we're trying to do at the moment is not only is it technology risk with all these great technologies coming through, it's market risk because we don't know, kind of exactly how things are going to shape out. It's regulatory risk. And then if anyone actually thinks about it, it's also, kind of physical risk and beyond from an investment perspective. So the risk premiums are really, really high, which makes it almost impossible to do it in a sort of a standard way, unless you're quite lucky. The other area where on the finance challenge is insurance. So it's really hard to get insurance for new projects because the insurance industry has all the statistics. We've done 5 million of these. We know how many fail, how many burn down. And with new things, they don't know what to do. So insurance is also a problem. There's a whole bigger discussion, which we can do over a beer, around the financial instability that the insurance industry is going to come into, but that's another matter. So we need the governments to set the guardrails. We need the sort of the financial mechanisms to be there to allow the finance. And there is plenty of finance, but it's how do we actually unleash all of that finance? And I'll come back to that at the end, but it comes almost back to the education of the community, because governments won't do it unless they have permission from their community. So I want to look at this from 3 different lenses of maybe different ways of financing. The first is just actually thinking about blended finance and different ways. And blended finance means very different things to different people. I was in a session last week with a whole lot of international development banks, and it was all about how do we finance the global south? How do we change everything? And I've had conversations with the biggest banks in the world saying, okay, we've got X billion ready to go. We can't find a single project to invest in the global south that fits our risk profile. And I was in this session it was 2 or 3 hours, and it was all about how are we going to sort of set up the governance processes to make sure that international development bank funding is, really used effectively and well. And it was all about lots of very sensible talk around that. And it didn't once actually talk about how do we manage the risk profile to unleash the private finance. It was sort of 3 hours of sort of talking about internal stuff. And so I kind of, I get frustrated. The finance world is not one world. There's some very different buckets and they don't necessarily talk to each other. They don't speak the same language. And so the blended finance is really around how do we think differently about some of the different mechanisms. So there's a lot of grant making bodies out there. But if you change that to being a guarantee as opposed to a grant, that goes a lot further. You can guarantee 20 projects because, as opposed to putting actual grant funding out the door at cash for 10. So maybe we can think about that. And I'd love to hear a bit more from Mitch as well, that the challenge of sort of doing venture capital for hardware and hard tech is really difficult. Software in some ways is quite easy. So other ways of actually where I've seen more success in some ways is working with strategic investors. And there's all sorts of reasons. So thinking about the mining industry, some of the mining industries made very bold pledges on commitments on what targets they're going to reach. And they're just starting to realize they're not going to get there with what they can buy off the shelf. So they're going to have to start investing in the solutions to actually do the pilots on their own projects, and so that they can actually achieve the goals they want to achieve. And there's strategic reasons why they want to achieve those goals. So thinking a bit differently about how to source that money. And then I'll go into a handful of kind of sort of specific examples as well. So I've done lots of work on hydrogen hubs. I think this is probably from the Australian hydrogen strategy, which my team helped do. And looking at hubs and sort of thinking about stacking revenue. So if you can generate revenue from different sources. So if you're just going to if I can just sell it to one person, that's great, but I need one person to underwrite the whole thing. So how do I actually stack revenue sources? So with a hydrogen hub, potentially, there are lots of different uses, and hydrogen hubs are very uncommercial at the moment. But how do we start thinking about what will people pay, when will they pay it, and how much will they need? So we did some work also in Europe with the NortH2 project and surveyed the whole of all the big industry across Northwest Europe and going, how much hydrogen might you use one day? What price would it need to be? What capex would you need to spend? And kind of built up that whole picture. So you might find that the lowest value use of hydrogen would be to put it into a gas pipeline up to whatever sort of the 10-15% limit before the pipes start cracking. But no one's going to pay much for that. The ammonia industry is it's very low margins, so that's not going to pay much for that. Steel industry, it's early. Maybe one day you'll get a reasonable amount, but trucks will pay quite a lot to refuel maybe. So how do you actually sort of stack that and go, well, trucks are not going to fill all the time, but if no one else is using it, I'll just put it into the pipe and at least get a minimum amount. Does that cover my interest payments? So sort of thinking through that's revenue stacking. And then that goes for different sort of this is I'm not going to go through the detail, but this is from the Australian bioenergy roadmap, which again my team did. But it's how do we start thinking about all the different ways that bioenergy could be sourced and what technologies and what use cases, and working the economics of all that to work out what's the highest value use case. Where could we get the most value for the country and to enable a hub of some description or projects to actually become commercial? And for Australia, at this, which was maybe 3 years ago now, it was industrial heat, it was sustainable aviation fuel, because power to liquids is too far away, and renewable fuels in the first instance. It's different in different regions and different countries, but that's kind of where it is. So that's thinking through those sort of techno-economics before to enable the commercial case to be done. And then diving into SAF. So we've done lots of work in the US on SAF hubs and thinking through, where are we going to actually make the most difference, and where can you have those strategic interventions to allow the price point to get anywhere close. And if you look sort of, there's all sorts of things there, and it's kind of, can we do feedstock optimization? Can we think about suiting the production technology to configure to the local feedstock and the local demand? What are the co-products again? Can you maximize co-location? Can you think about dry weight logistics and backload economics? Can you start doing some stuff there? How do you find those extra dollars that just get this over the line? There was a great project I did in Australia where we were looking at transforming a shut-down oil refinery into a biorefinery, and then for the first 10 years, probably doing mostly renewable diesel for the mine sites, and then flipping it into SAF, which can be done as long as you sort of, as you're doing the conversion, you would label it for that, and then selling that to the airlines. So you can actually have a sort of a 20, 30-year life from the biorefinery by thinking again about different use cases. A couple more examples, and then I'll stop. So I do lots of work with regenerative agriculture, and we've talked a little bit about that. Lots on soil carbon. So we were talking soil carbon earlier. Thinking through how do you monetize? And one of the key ways of doing this, sort of offsets, insets, all of that sort of stuff, is actually going to the buyer, segmenting the buyers and what they'll pay. So we've kind of looked, we talked to lots and lots of buyers globally. We talked to sort of various market players, and just going, okay, well, there's some buyers who'll buy a lot. You want to get rid of several million, that's fine, but it's going to be less than $10 a ton. And then there's some people who want a bit higher quality. There's some who want really high quality, and there's inset buyers who maybe will pay even more. But how do you? That's great. Okay, let's just go to the inset buyers, but that's going to take you 2 years to get there. Whereas if you want to sell quickly and get some cash to keep the business going, maybe you go to the budget buyers. It's not going to make you rich, but it might pay your bills. So how do you start thinking around that commercial strategy of using that to take the company forward? And then the last sort of example of just thinking differently around how we think about this is about thinking through the whole value chain. So this was the work we did with the Climate Leaders Coalition, which is the organization I helped set up with a whole lot of people in Australia. And we did a Scope 3 roadmap. And we did 5 different value chains, and we got the CEOs of all the major companies in that value chain in the same room with a whole lot of analysis, and said, okay, this is how there was various ones on. There was beer and beef, and there was sustainable aviation fuel and fit outs. And this one is this was the beer one, Beer Co. And we got everyone in the room, and we worked out where the emissions were in the whole value chain, what the interventions might be at each stage. And clearly the biggest intervention was, why are you not using recycled glass for your beer bottle? And the CEO of that, and that was asked by the CEO of the beer company to the CEO of the glass manufacturer. And I'll turn off that. And he said, well, it's because your specification says I have to have no bubbles in my glass. So I have to give you kind of really good glass. And so I can't use recycled. He said, well, I don't care. Okay, well, we'll change that then. And that reduced the emissions of the final product, just because it was a specification that no one actually really wanted. It was just written into the procurement standards. So how do you start having a different level of conversation along the value chain? If it's the salesman to the buyer, they're never going to have that conversation. If it's a bit higher level and more strategic, then you will. And so the last thing I'll come back to is the how do we change the narrative, and how do we change the community wanting people to think through this, and effectively to change what government does to set those boundaries so we can unleash the capital. And I'd say, myself included, the environment movements and scientists and technologists are terrible about telling this story. We're all awful at it. How do you actually, same with preventative health. No one actually does preventative health, because that's decades away. So that's where we've got, and we've been pushing on a rational argument alone, and rational arguments don't work. And there's some wonderful work by Harvard psychologists going, we're really hardwired to react to things that are instantaneous, imminent, intentional or immoral, and climate change mostly doesn't set off any of those. So it's only if we can do positive storytelling and attract people to a better future that we can change how we do things. And that's the work I do with boards and investors and other things. That'll be it for now. Thank you.
We have the roving mic for questions. Thank you, all three of you. Amazing perspectives and really a very missing piece, as you've heard, for many of the innovations that we've talked about today. Any questions or comments from people in the audience? Yes. If you can identify yourself too, that'd be awesome. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Alexandrina Gloro from Arizona State. We know that Indigenous stewardship is crucial and cost-effective to climate solutions. So how can funders be on the forefront of protecting Indigenous land rights and fostering global Indigenous leadership and protecting or natural resource management? Small questions.
Exactly. That's a very important question. And at the Earthshot Prize, we make sure that Indigenous voices are central into our whole process, from nomination to selection of finalists to investment. So we actually have an Indigenous leader working group at the nomination, at the search level, to help us understand what are the solutions that are actually working and that are recognizing those voices and the stewardship of local people and guardians on the front lines. So they help us understand where should we go and look and who are the solutions that we should be awarding, and then they nominate into the process. And then we make sure that based on that knowledge, then if Indigenous solutions get selected, we spotlight them, we work with them, and then we attract the right kind of investors that can support the work on the ground. And in parallel to that, we do a whole lot of work around storytelling as well, in partnership with the Royal Foundation. I don't know if you saw, but there's a new documentary series that came out on the BBC called Guardians of Nature, or Protectors of Natures. And it's 6 episodes on Indigenous voices and what they're doing to protect lands and oceans and supporting us in this whole journey to solve the climate crisis.
And I think I actually mentored, there was a winner of the Earthshot Prize, who's an Indigenous organisation on the Great Barrier Reef.
Yeah,
Brisbane. Yeah. So I actually did some mentoring on them. I'd come at it from a slightly different point of view in that, so we've done lots of work on just transition and actually integrating that into transition planning and listening to diverse voices from all elements of the community. And we've certainly brought in Australia, kind of the First Nations is a very important stakeholder in Australia. So thinking through how do companies, if they don't think about that, why is it going to be a problem and how can they benefit from doing that and integrating that thinking? So from a sort of the board strategy and company strategy level, that's the angle we would take.
Awesome. Yes.
Boris and Hoor, Smithsonian. John, this question is for you. I heard you said that in your conversations with financial leaders, they said there is funding ready to be disbursed for projects. And I heard that before actually from another financial partner. My question is, all the morning and part of the afternoon, we heard about the need of funding for all of these solutions and initiatives. What's lacking between, what is the disconnect? And I think you mentioned it, between what is expected for those providing the funding and those who can reach those funds. I mean, what would be your advice into sort of bridging that gap, that somehow we're not talking the same language?
I might let Mitch, if he's still there, answer the early stage stuff. In terms of sort of large scale, how do we get billions out the door for sort of large scale infrastructure projects and the like? It's a real challenge. Again, we were talking over coffee around large banks are successful largely, but they're for-profit organizations, and so they have guidelines on investment. Do I agree with the investment guidelines? maybe not, but that's what they have to operate with. And so if it doesn't fit that risk profile, it is really hard for them to unleash capital. And in kind of a developing world, it's interestingly, I think it's as much perception as reality on what the risk is on the ground sometimes. But it's hard for them to do that without some level of guarantee, something to take recourse to, some government sort of supporting it. So that's from the large scale sort of deployment of billions of dollars. But Mitch, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here. Appreciate it, John. I mean, you hit on this a lot during your presentation as well, which I agree with. It's simply a matter of risk return differences. And the word that just keeps coming up, especially with all of the uncertainty going on, is uncertainty. So whenever you're bringing uncertainty into a situation and that equates to risk, investors are going to shy away. And I think what we're seeing is even a lot of the earlier stage investors that historically would have an okay appetite with funding these types of opportunities are feeling even more risk averse given the rapidly changing landscape from a policy perspective and from a demand perspective, with buyers, not proliferating at the rate that I think the industry thought they would several years ago. And so it does require, to John's point, different players to come in that are willing to take on some of that risk in a disproportionate manner so that other investors feel comfortable coming in at the early stage. And by early stage, a lot of companies need to finance most of that using venture dollars and hopefully some grants. But that in-between stage is really what I was referring to in my presentation, where there's a need for, to your point, John, having some strategic partners and investors is a huge help. But maybe it's combined with some philanthropic capital, hopefully combined with some public sector dollars, to then make the conditions appropriate enough or to the right risk level that other capital providers are able to come in so that these companies can just start getting those milestones hit from a commercial perspective to unlock that later stage capital that John was just alluding to.
And I'll go back to that, sorry, but that sort of strategic angle as strategic investor, because that they can actually come in quite early if it meets a specific need. So we're doing lots on sustainable aviation fuels, and the airlines have set up funds to do early stage investment on SAF technologies. So Airbus and Qantas have done one, and others. So it's what's the need? Why are they doing that? Well, because they can see a runway of people going, well, we should stop flying. And there's a decent argument for stopping flying, except we all quite like it sometimes. So if we can all fly with no emissions, then that'd be lovely. So they're investing heavily into a solution that they see as slightly existential to their continued business. And the mining sector is doing the same, and probably others. But.
Yeah. And I have to say, even though currently the funding and investment world is kind of retrieving and being more risk averse, there are a few players that are innovating with new financial instruments. For example, the European Investment Bank has a whole facility to help climate startups in that initial early stage, especially with project financing as well. They provide loan guarantees and non-dilutive capital, as well as technical expertise to help these solutions attract the right kind of investors and de-risk their position. And others that, for example, Brooksfield or Brick for Energy Catalyst with blended finance instruments as well, and hybrid venture, that type of financial tools. So there are people out there that are leading the way, but definitely we need more of those. And then what we keep hearing from them as an advice to solutions, what can you do to de-risk and make them feel more comfortable in investing? The first thing is build this relationship early with those more institutional investors. So even if you're not at that stage yet, start building those relationships so that you build that trust and a kind of confidence in them for when the right moment comes further down the line. hire a strong CFO, do all those technical checks. And then the second thing is be very smart about how you de-risk and you position yourself as a de-risked investment. So it could be working with those players or structuring your investments in a creative way. For example, try and find partners that are willing to write or agree to longer term offtake agreements or letter of intents that are a little bit longer term. Work with insurance companies, so really think about how do I signal to my investors that my solutions or my company can be a de-risked investment. And I can give some examples and some names afterwards if needed.
Fantastic. Those were brilliant answers. And I would just like to inject the fact that we have said there shouldn't be any new investments in fossil fuel infrastructure, but there's been 3 trillion since Paris was signed. Now, is that a logical investment for these large banks to be making? Probably not, but they're still doing it. So there's an element of politics in here too. And we're going to be hearing from Paul Moynester, who was part of the Carbon Bankroll report tomorrow on that. So this was so helpful, the 3 of you. There's one more question from Alex, but I need to get consensus from the room. We've just heard from Assistant Vice Chancellor Stuart Brocklebank that Rachel Kite, who is the climate negotiator for the UK and previously at the World Bank, is going to be able to come in and give us a quick briefing on what she thinks is going to be coming for COP. I'm getting nods. Do I have a consensus that we will just have a hydration break that's going to be fluid? So instead of a proper coffee break, if you need water or fruit, please just fluidly hop in and out. And we will have the last question from Alex. Those on the panel, I know there's a couple of you waiting for the 3:55 panel, where we're just going to give a bit of a pause to see if Rachel pops in, gives her 10-minute insiders update, and then we'll continue with the panel. So thank you for patience online.
Thanks, Amanda. This is something that Amanda and I have been discussing over the past couple of days, and I was kind of emboldened by your Vision 100, which was a cheeky, unscientific question, is that I feel that we're missing a whole bunch of political leadership or business leadership about what a future decarbonised, nature-positive world could look like. And then so I wonder, what's your vision for 2100, and what does that look like that's not hair shirt and Edwardian, as my vision of the future sometimes appears in my mind?
Indeed. I'm quite amused. Last time I saw Rachel Kite was in a bar in DC a few months ago. So I'm gonna answer that sort of roundabout. I was at a wonderful session at New York Climate Week 18 months ago, 20 months ago, hosted by the World Economic Forum, and it was about climate communication and how we've failed to make an impact. And it had social media people. It had Simon from Time Carbon or whatever it's called, and a whole lot of really interesting people. Solly Townsend, for those of you who know her from London, and there was about sort of 20-25 people about how do we redesign climate communication to effectively attract people to a better future. The 2 things that came out of that for me, one was the sort of the content of how we communicate, which I think I was kind of probably on already. It was kind of, it has to be personal. It has to appeal to you. Humans, basically, we look after, we're sort of short-term, greedy, selfish as a race, and that's why we're so bloody successful. And we look after ourselves and our family and our community. And the further it gets away, the less we care. If it's happens to be sort of on the outskirts of Exeter, we care. If it's in Plymouth, it's like, so if it's on the Isle of Wight, that's miles away. And if it's happens to be on the Bangladesh Delta, that doesn't resonate in the slightest. So that's how humans work. That's how we're hardwired. So you have to communicate in that way. It has to be about your kids or the job or the air quality or your commute. It has to be something that will resonate. And so that's the topic you have to, and why is it important? So just reframing everything to that. And then the other one is who do you communicate to? and you don't need to convince the whole community. You know, the early adopters on the innovation sort of take-up curve, or whatever that's called. We're all in the room. You know, we're kind of going, oh yeah, well we need to do it. So the laggards are over there, and really, who cares? Because they'll die eventually. And it's just it's the early majority. It's the next 20% is the only people you need to talk to. You don't tailor any communication to anyone else other than the next 20% who actually already get it, but are not doing anything. And so that's the key, my key takeaway from that. And then so the first book which I launched at the Paris Climate Conference was around the 2100 vision, and then there was sort of one on 2030 stories. And it was remarkable how similar some of those were. And what do we really want as humans? That's also the same. You know, you actually, or going back to what do we value is kind of, well, you value community and feeling valued and having a nice quality of life and thinking your kids are going to be all right, and and whatever it might be. But it's actually not that difficult to work out what we want. So that's the vision. Anything to add? What's your vision? Two words. You're not allowed to.
I mean, we're not even 2100. We need to solve the climate crisis by 2030.
So, the second book was stories from 2030. So, what do we need to do in the next decade to help that do? But everyone else is busy now, so we'll just talk.
Exactly.
So
yeah.
So, what do you want to see in the next 10 years? I'm going to take a moderator.
In the next 10 years, we need to have significantly make progress towards our 5 Earthshot goals. That's where we're headed towards. If we manage to get closer to there, then it means we're on track.
What's the one intervention that's going to allow that?
We need, there's 3 key levers: policy, funding, and storytelling. And one of the things that we work a lot on is storytelling. As you say, it needs to capture the imagination of everyone. We tend to live a little bit in a climate bubble. We go to the same conference, see the same people. We're all bought into this, and we can't really speak to anyone outside of it. So how can we break that barrier? It's going to be a key focus of what we do. And how can we use our amazing solution heroes and many of you in the room to tell those stories and to capture the imagination of people out there and young people. Nick?
Yeah, thanks so much for the wonderful panel and conversation. And Amanda, not to correct you, but it's actually $7.9 trillion since the Paris Agreement. So that the 65 largest banks have lent to the oil and gas industry. But just a quick-ish maybe question, John. Really appreciate it. I spent a lot of my time, my name is Paul Moynister from Tobo Finance, who Amanda mentioned earlier. We spend a lot of time sort of working at the intersection of companies and banks. And to your point around the sort of banks need to see something 500 times before they feel comfortable. One of the big challenges is that like blended finance is great, but it's very much sort of indexed on novelty in terms of like doing one-off or second-off projects. And so the question I have is, well, A, is that a fair characterization to say that there's like a gap to get from like, we can do this once or we can do this twice to like, we can get this to be repeatable? And then secondly, if that is a true sort of accurate analysis, like where can we figure out like where it's coming from in sort of that like that boring middle part where it's like not innovative, but it's not so boring that banks will fund it, that it's like that sort of in between second wave adoption side of it? And who do you see as the market for those types of projects?
So I think, it's kind of having some long-termness in government support or whatever the blended finance is. So, kind of if it's World Bank or an International Development Bank, it's like, here is a 10-year program and we're going to keep it the same for 10 years. And so you can do repeat transactions through that sort of same mechanism. And I do think the guarantees, which is talked about lots, but is not really used very much, is potentially such a powerful instrument to say, that we will fund things on this basis and take first loss or whatever it might be. Democracies are a bit of a pain in this circumstance because policies change. But there's some downsides to not having a democracy. I've heard. So it is tricky in a democracy, but as much as possible, you can either have a sort of ramping going over 10 years. This is going to build in this way, and just having some stable sort of frameworks for the investors to know what they're doing. And if you think about some of the tax policies for VCs around the world, which have been reasonably stable for 20 years, that's enabled the VC industry to be established effectively in different countries. But again, Mitch, I don't know if you've got any thoughts on what would help you unleash. And Amanda's about to tell us to be quiet.
I am indeed. And Mathilde, they're needing you in the filming studio. And we've got Rachel Kite arriving. So I'm sorry, Mitch, we didn't get
Go
to hear
for
from
it.
you again.
No worries.
Fantastic, all three of you. Wonderful insights. Thank you so much for a terrific panel.
Thank you for having us.
Thanks, everybody. Appreciate it.